And on this year's Esra Sene, I want to share a little bit about my family. I can't remember the exact first time that my mother mentioned my uncle, Suwu Gebre Tinsae Debretien, also known as Gerense. But what I do remember are the adjectives that my mother would use to talk about him. To her, Gerense was smart, kind, funny, courageous, strong, and humble but confident. My mother grew up with 8 brothers and sisters, and Gerense was one of her older brothers. In the 1970s in Karen, during which my mother and her siblings were raised, living in fear life was a normal part of their existence. Under Ethiopian occupation, they were required to undergo school instruction in the colonizers' language, Amharic, and occupying soldiers roamed the paths Eritreans would take to ensure that they weren't organizing for liberation any kind of way, or displaying any cultural pride that showed their Eritrean heritage as something distinct. My uncle Gerense was a gifted soccer player in his time. He was very well known in Karen, and he even had the chance to travel to Asmara and outside of Eritrea to Kenya with his league. Everyone that I have met who knew Gerense tells me that he was extremely talented and that he could have gone on to do something great with his life had he not chosen to instead join the ELF in the fight for Eritrean liberation in 1975. In her final memories of Gerense, my mother says that he had explained to his siblings that he was going to be the sacrifice for their family. Like many of our martyrs for him, he knew that he was not going to come back alive. And so he wanted his siblings to focus on making my grandparents happy. He just told them that they would need to move on. My uncle Gerense served 2 years as a guerrilla soldier, and he was martyred in July of 1977. The most difficult thing for my entire family, but my grandmother especially, was the time period before they found out that he had actually passed. You always have a small bit of hope that your loved one is somewhere alive until you have proof that they've passed. Although I have never met Gerense, he has had a profound impact on my life. On my first trip to Eritrea with my parents and my brothers in 2007, I remember feeling deeply fortunate that I had had the chance to be in the country that he had sacrificed his life for. I had heard so much about him all my life. I even got to spend time in my grandparents' home where Gerense had grown up, and where my mother had told me so many stories about, the exact places that he had studied for his tests in the house, or how he and her brothers would race to finish a ma'adi together after coming back from shul. When I would walk around Karen at that time, I thought to myself, this is the same city my uncle Gerense walked through. For me, it was magical and to an extent sacred to think that I had never met him, but that we were sharing life experiences. I understand Gerense as an exceptional individual, not only because of his courage in joining the liberation movement, but also because of his character. On average to this day, I would say that my mother mentions him almost once a week. And I oftentimes think to myself, wow, how do you have such an impact on someone, in this case his sister, that they mention you routinely almost 50 years later? It was definitely because of my mother sharing these stories about the kind of person Gerense was that I too feel touched and inspired by his example. Although me and Gerense have never met, he reminds me all the time what perseverance looks like in practice. I can honestly say that in the moments in my life where I have wanted to give up on something, or I felt fed up by the amount of challenges in front of me, all I had to do was think about how Gerense might have felt when he was on the front lines. I ask myself questions like, would Gerense have given up? And the answer is always no, so I know that I have to keep going. I am so proud to be his niece, and I can't thank my mother enough for sharing his legacy with me, and both of my parents for teaching me to observe Esra Sene.